Good morning, everybody. I'm Janet Tobin, as most of you that are on know. I would like to welcome you here to this very, very wonderful program that we've set up, a very timely program about the media and the way they produce the news and opinions. The program is called News or Narrative, Fact or Opinion, or Fact or Fiction. And so to begin this morning, I'd like to call on our rabbi, Rabbi Gordon Yaffe, to start us off with the Devar Torah.
Thank you, Janet. Just gonna highlight. Here we go. Okay. Good morning, everyone. In our prayer book, in the very, very beginning pages, is a section of study of rabbinic texts. And it begins with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Al Shlosha Dvarim Haolam Omed. The world exists on three principles: on justice, on truth, and on peace. For it is written in the book of Zechariah, with truth, justice, and peace shall you judge in your gates. And so in the section on truth, there are two very, very important teachings. One comes from the Psikta Rabbati of Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachmani, who said, we find that the Holy One created everything in the world. Only falsehood and exaggeration were not God's doing.
No, I do.
People devised their own doing.
I'm not going to hear it.
And there is a very, very wonderful idea that is based on the Hebrew of the word for truth, which is emet. Emet is spelled Aleph Mem Tav. Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet, Mem is the middle, and Tav is the end. And so the idea is that to find truth, you have to go looking for it. But when you have sheker, shin kuf resh, those letters are right next to each other in the alphabet. And so a lie is easy to find. You don't have to go looking for it. It's all over the place. And the word emet, the letters Aleph, Mem, and Tav, they each have two bottoms to them. That means that truth is solid. It's not wavering. It exists and it is true. Sheker, Shin, Kuf, Resh, each of those letters only have one foot and they can fall very easily. So I share these ideas. We talk about truth all the time and we yearn to understand the truth. As it said in the beginning passage, that everything was created by God except for falsehood and exaggeration. That was created by us. And so we need to look. We need to look for the truth in our world, to use our God-given talents to understand and to take in everything that we have and to understand that which is emet. It is with these words that we begin, and it is my honor and privilege to call upon our Chazan, Cantor Joshua Shrum, who in the midst of this pandemic said, let's have a lunch and learn. And he put together a lunch and learn that was all about Israel and Zionism that meets every Monday and Wednesday. And it is from that lunch and learn that today's session was born. Cantor Shrum.
Thank you, Rabbi Yaffe. And I want to welcome everybody to a wonderful program that, yes, was born out of our twice weekly lunch and learn. We have about a dozen or so very passionate members of the community all of whom love Israel and love to discuss and debate about Israel. But all of us believe very strongly in Zionism and believe very strongly that a strong Israel equals a strong America. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And the way this program was born was that shortly after the election, I came across a debate in the Forward newspaper by Ari Hoffman and Joel Swanson. It was called, "What Should Biden's Approach to Israel Be?" And there was a very lively debate between Ari and Joel, and we discussed it as a class, but many of us were a little disturbed by much of the language used. And it led to a lengthy discussion in our class about facts versus opinion in journalism and what news looks like in today's very polarized society. You know, when you turn on Fox News, you kind of know what you're going to get. And when you turn on MSNBC, you kind of know what you're going to get. And the same is true for so many news outlets around the country. Well, so here we're having this discussion, and Janet Tobin, one who you heard from a minute ago, she said, well, I know Ari Hoffman. Maybe he would come and speak to our group. Well, one thing led to another, and the next thing we knew, we secured not only Ari, but also Dr. Batya Ungar-Sargon, the editor of the Forward's opinion page. I want to thank Janet for making this whole program happen, and we're thrilled to have both Dr. Ari Hoffman and Dr. Batya Ungar-Sargon as our guests this morning. Let me give you a quick introduction of both of them. Dr. Batya Ungar-Sargon is the opinion editor of The Forward, which has been called, quote unquote, the most influential nationwide Jewish media outlet today. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New York Review of Books Daily, and Foreign Policy. She is the recent recipient of an ADL Aspen Institute Civil Society Fellowship and has also won a Clarion Award and a New York Press Club Award. She lives in Brooklyn. Dr. Ari Hoffman is an opinion columnist at The Forward, where he writes about politics and culture. He's an adjunct assistant professor at NYU, and his writing has also appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Tablet Magazine, the New York Observer, and a range of other publications. Ari has also worked on Israeli-Palestinian issues at the State Department's Office of the Legal Advisor and has served as the acting assistant dean of students at Harvard University. He's previously been awarded Tikva, Dorot, FASPE, F-A-S-P-E, and Dexter Fellowships, among other awards. And he holds a doctorate in English literature from Harvard and a law degree from Stanford. Warm, huge welcome and thank you to both of our guests. I'd like to let everybody know that you're welcome to submit questions in the chat, but just please be aware that we've received a lot of questions in advance, so we may not have time to get to everyone's questions, but please, your thoughts and questions are very much welcome in the chat via Zoom. So I'd like to start to ask both of you some general questions about the state of journalism today, and then we'll get to more specific questions raised by members of our congregation. Could you both just spend a moment discussing your views on the current state of media in general and Jewish media in particular? Whoever would like to start, go ahead.
Ari, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here on so many levels. Thank you to Jan and Erwin, dear family, friends, this is the second time I've had the honor of being with your shul, and it's a joy always, and of course to the Rabbi and Cantor, and to my comrade and friend and editor, Batya. It's an honor to be here with you as well. I don't think should come at any surprise that the reason we're having this conversation is because the media is at a moment of crisis. We're a deeply polarized country in some ways, although Batya might have something to say about that, that polarization is happening on the level of the message and the medium, both at the same time. What I mean by that is our ideas of what's true and not seems increasingly to depend on what kind of news you read and what kind of TV shows you watch. I also want to note that there's a generational crisis as well. For some of us, it is cable news. where we get our information. Others continue to read newspapers, whether in print or online. Others are, sort of get their information from Twitter, and the younger generation are watching TikTok videos and Snap stories. And I think it's important to keep all of that in mind. That's what's shifting, is not only the message, but the medium in which that message is conveyed as well. I also want to say that when I say media, I don't just mean one industry or one sector. It increasingly is clear to me that media is the very air we breathe and the way we move through the world. By that, I mean that politics is increasingly inextricable from media, that there aren't two separate things. I think this presidency, for anything else that it's done, has reemphasized that fact, that what happens on Twitter is both real and not real in strange and interesting ways. Just as technology has redefined every aspect of our lives, so too we live in a world where everything is media. And if everything is media, that means that media's problems or media's challenges are also everything's challenges and problems. So that the crisis of media also is a crisis of politics, it's a crisis of culture, and it's a crisis of knowledge itself. What is true, what is not true. So what do we do? I think, one approach is to say, well, we need less opinion, right? That we need more reporting and more facts. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. The task of describing the world is always going to be urgent and necessary. But I'm not sure whether we need less opinion or we just need better opinion. By that, I mean that, there's a lot of opinion on the internet, comments, short, retweets, things like that, wall posts. But the act, and this is something that my experience working in the opinion pages at the Forward with Batya has reiterated to me, the true act of crafting an opinion is a deep and serious thing. It involves looking at the world, it involves thinking about the world, considering counter-arguments, incorporating those counter-arguments into your perspective, and trying to say something real and right and true about the world as you see it, with the caveat that, of course, sometimes you get it wrong or you get it half right. So when it comes to opinion, I believe we need not less opinion, but better opinion. And I want to, reiterate the seriousness of which we should take our own opinions as well. That means thinking about them, but it also means that an opinion is a judgment about the world. It's a perspective on the world, and it's an important and serious thing. And so in my own thinking about opinion journalism, I think, both about my individual take on a certain policy or a certain moment in history, but also about what do I want the general conversation to be. And here we come to the question of opposing or differing opinions. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to sort of strike that impossible balance of having strong opinions on our own, but also creating the maximum space for other points of view. And it's really hard. It's really hard because those two things kind of are in tension, which is why I've been so pleased to work with Batya, I think, who's not to speak for her, but to speak with her, this idea of creating an opinion pages that truly is open to as wide a perspective as can be. And I've written about this lots. That doesn't mean that every opinion gets a hearing. But if we have to err on the side of one way or the other, being more rather than less expansive. So that's sort of where I'm at. I think we need to think better. I think we all need to try to think well. I also think we're at a moment of transition, of change, and a moment that's a little bit of a blank canvas. And I wonder if, this strange year and difficult year might provide some or all of us with the opportunity to, get back down to first principles and rethink things a little bit, and see where we end up. So it's not just that the message is the medium, but the message needs a medium, right? And thinking about not only what we say, but how we say it is really important. And just my final comment on the question of truth, I believe two things. One is that truth is a process. You have to get to it. We don't see it all at once. We see glimpses of it. But the other thing is that you have to call it as you see it. And there's a writer named, I think James Salter said this, that write the truest sentence and then write another one, and then another one. And that if you build up truth somehow and grow with it, you get to a place of real insight. So those are just some initial thoughts, and I'm happy to get into Jewish media as we go further.
Okay, thank you. Ari Bacia, why don't you give us your thoughts on the current state of journalism, Jewish journalism, and truth and facts versus opinion, or your overall thoughts on this?
All right, I'm going to try to do a little bit of each of those. And if I say anything interesting, we can come back to it. I definitely want to start by thanking you all. Thank you, Rabbi and Cantor, and thank you, Ari, for bringing me into this. I'm really excited to be here, and it really is a privilege to be talking to all of you today. So at the most basic level, the difference between a news story and an op-ed is that an op-ed should be disputable. It should be bringing an argument to the table. So we kind of cheat with Ari and Joel's debates because we bring you two opinions and we have them debate them, right, against each other. But in short, that is what you're supposed to get. A news article is supposed to give you information about the world that can either be corroborated or not. It's either a fact or it's not. And an opinion is supposed to take that information and make an argument, come up with a thesis about the world that could be debated between two people, is not necessarily true or false, but is believed by some people and not believed by others. Now, I think one of the problems with today's media is that, as the Cantor pointed out, a lot of the news that we get, which is supposed to be objective fact, verifiable, things that people of different opinions could agree on, is filtered through a very opinionated language. And it's not just MSNBC and Fox, it's the New York Times as well. So Peter Baker, for example, the White House correspondent, it is impossible to read his coverage of Trump and not know exactly how he feels about Trump. There are sentences in every article the New York Times, the paper of record, writes about the president that have disputable sentences in them that give you a sense of what the reporter's feelings and opinions are about the president. That's really, really bad. And at the same time, what the New York Times has done, as well as others, it's just an example, it has shrunk its opinion pages. And I mean, it may shock you to learn, may not shock you to learn that they didn't run a single op-ed defending the president in the run-up to the election, not one. I started counting about 5 months ago. So on the one hand, you have opinion filtering into the news. And on the other hand, you have the shrinking of what they consider to be legitimate opinions that people could debate. And that is happening writ large across the news media in a way that is very, very bad. And in a way that at the Forward, I have tried to sort of combat that in my own little way with the help of Ari, of course. So what is an opinion editor thinking? Someone like me, I'm coming to this job every morning and I'm saying, I'm going to run 3 op-eds and I want each one to be read. And I want my readers to feel that their needs are getting met. I want my writers to feel like their needs are getting met. And then I want my needs to get met. What does that mean? So there's 3 competing sets of needs going into every op-ed. Okay, that's how I think about it. The writer, let's say Ari, has the need to express himself. He has had a thought, and he thinks it's smart and he wants to share it with other people in the hopes that it can make the world a better place. That's the writer's need. They want to express this thought. Then you have the reader's need. Why does a reader come to an op-ed? Why do you read an op-ed? It's not giving you information you didn't have, ideally. Sometimes it does, but really what it's doing is taking the information you already have about the world and telling you how this writer thinks and feels about it, making a case for what this information means in the world and making a case that is, again, remember, arguable. So why does the reader read this? Why do you click on this when you see it on Facebook? I think it's because we look to people that we trust to help us develop an emotional relationship to the world, an emotional relationship to the facts that we see. We learn something about the world. We learn, how many people died of the coronavirus yesterday, and we have emotions about that. And we are looking to people to help us understand those emotions, give them language, help us feel excited or scared or surprised, and to give us insight about these facts. And part of that is the reason that it has to be debatable is because we are involved in not just looking at the facts, but trying to figure out what those facts mean to us, to our life, to our world. And it is just as exciting when somebody gets that wrong as when somebody gets that right. When somebody tells us, oh, the number of coronavirus deaths means this. If we know that that's not what it means to us, it's going to make us feel something, and it's going to make us feel alive. So that's the reader. So the writer wants to express themselves. The reader is looking for insight or an emotional connection to the world and to the facts of the world. And then the op-ed editor, the editor, is trying to curate a plethora of voices that have a certain balance. And now I'm going to tell you what I see as that balance. And I'm actually very sad to be I feel increasingly alone in seeing things this way. And I think, we can get into this later, I think it's because we're the Jewish media that is what gives me that insight to keep being able to do it. But so let me tell you what I consider to be the 3 main mandates of an opinion section. And I'll tell you where I think others are not quite holding this up. And then we can go into detail on anything that's interesting here. So I would say that the first main thing that I look for when I'm considering, what mix I want today. So the first mandate of an opinion section is to raise up the voices of people who have been disenfranchised, cut out of the conversation, disempowered by the current power structures, people like African Americans or Black Jews or Palestinians or Muslims in America or Orthodox Jews, people who you don't hear from, whose voices matter, but we don't hear enough from them. And to me, that includes Trump's supporters, not that they were disenfranchised, that they didn't have their vote, but because people like the New York Times have cut them out of the discourse. We have to bring them in, we have to hear from them. So that's the first mandate. The second thing I'm looking for is to reflect the full breadth of legitimate opinion relevant to our community, the full breadth. And so what that means is 75% of our community are Democrats, we got to get them. 25% are Trump voters, we got to get them. 50% say that they're pro-choice, we got to get them. 50% say they're pro-life, we got to get them. Is to have an understanding of where the opinion of our community lies, and to truly make sure that everyone in our community who reflects a segment of our community is getting their say. And then the third I would say is to challenge the readers and the editorial point of view in good faith. It is very important to me that people that I disagree with can show up in my pages and challenge my point of view and change my mind, as they often do. So that's the 3 needs that I believe an editor should be looking to in curating an opinion section. Raise up the voices of the disempowered, represent the full breadth of legitimate opinion relevant to the community, and then challenge the editorial and reader's point of view in good faith. And I believe that these values are things that really are not happening in the media anymore. Representing, so we saw how the New York Times cut off 72 million people, right? They said, you don't belong in our opinion section. And the last time they ran someone like that, the editor got fired, and since 3 more people have left. So they've cut off a huge segment of half the nation, right? So they're failing in that second one to represent the full breadth of legitimate opinion. They're failing to challenge themselves in good faith. Are they raising up the voices of the disenfranchised? Well, it depends who you see as having power right now. To me, it's very clear that the left has a lot of cultural power. So when you're lifting up the voices of people that the left now idolizes, you know, is that actually doing that first mandate? I don't think so. And meanwhile, you would never see an Orthodox Jew saying, you know, how come none of you are speaking up for us, you know, when they were getting beaten up in the streets of New York, for example. So we went through the difference between an op-ed and the news. And we went through the problem with the way the news media is handling itself today. And then we looked at the sort of three competing sets of needs that every op-ed has going on. And then we talked a little bit about how I see the mandate of an opinion section, and happy to go into more detail on any of those things.
Thank you, Batya, very much for a very informed and comprehensive answer to our question. But I want to dig a little deeper on that, because what you're saying sounds perfect. It sounds utopian. It sounds like you're bringing in all the voices that need to be heard, and I appreciate how seriously you take that responsibility. But a number of people in our congregation, and especially some of the people in our class, will argue that a number of the voices are not being heard and are not being represented. And I'm going to read a few questions that we received in verbatim, and just using their language so you can fully understand that their point of view may be. I don't want it to sound like I'm accusing anybody of anything, but some of our congregants certainly are. So Eva Kestner, who is a very valued member of our class, she writes, in Hoffman's debate with Swanson, he did not respond to many of Swanson's lies and distortions about Israel. A true response, if ignored, spreads the negative narrative about Israel. Why does the Forward not give voice to more writers on the right to give a more balanced view and help delegitimize the propaganda campaign against Israel? And that sentiment that the Forward is definitely a lot more left-leaning seems to be the prevalent view, at least among people I've spoken with. Do you agree with that? And what's your take on that accusation?
So it might surprise you to learn that I'm frequently called a racist because I run right-wingers, because I run too many right-wingers according to the left. So we definitely get it from all sides. I will say the Forward does lean left, but I think it should, and I'll explain why. Because in doing my second mandate, which is reflecting the full breadth of legitimate opinion relevant to our community, I am trying to hew very closely to the contours of our community. And it is a fact that the Jewish community is, you know, 3/4 Democrat and 1/4 Republican. Now, on the question of Israel, we're much more centrist than that division might make it sound. And in that sense, I would say that I tend to hew maybe a little bit more to the extremes, both left and right. For example, I will run settlers. And the settlers are way to the right of probably most of the people on this call, right? They are very much to the right of where 3/4 of American Jews stand on Israel. But I will run them because I want to be challenging us to think in those ways. But I do try my best to represent that in the opinion pages, what our community looks like. And it's not always perfect. So for example, I will run things by Joel and I'll be like, oh, I don't agree with that, you know, but it's very important to have that say out there so that readers can then, the goal is not for every reader to agree with every piece. The goal is for them to understand where significant portions of their shared community are. Right? So to me, the point of Joel's pieces is not necessarily that he's going to convince me. The point is you need to know that a lot of millennial Jews, young Jews, think this. And wouldn't you rather know that than not know that, especially if you care about Israel? Like, wouldn't you rather know where the people, what the people that you need to convince think? And this, obviously, there's limits to that. Right? Like I wouldn't run people who I consider to be anti-Semitic. There are limits, but to me, Joel speaks for a very big portion of our community, a very young and very important portion of our community that is still very much on the side of legitimate opinion. And now I want to hear what Ari has to say about this.
No. Just to thank you for the question, and I'm sorry if I sort of let the side down. I think those debates and those were Batya's idea, and we've done many of them, and I think they form a kind of archive of conversation, and I think the goal in those debates is not so much that every point has an exact counterpoint, especially as we've done more of them. I think our idea is, yes, to debate the specific points of policy or of ideas or identity or whatever, but the other point is to model what a kind of conversation looks like. And that doesn't mean that it's play acting, or it doesn't mean, but it does mean that, to Batya's point, that it's not an exact refutation. I think what the notion is to kind of constellate two opposing viewpoints. And sometimes I won't respond to a specific point, not because I agree with it, but just because time is limited, right? And I want to go somewhere else. And Joel does the same thing as well. And I think there's our idea is a broader kind of universe of disagreement. And that's a little bit of the context. And we do it as you read it. I mean, we do it in real time, and we don't speak outside of the writing in the piece itself, really. So it has that level of spontaneity that you might have at a late night dinner conversation with a friend who you disagree with, or at a bar over a drink on, debating a certain subject. That's just a little bit of insight into that genre, and I'm happy to talk about that more. I just want to go back to something Batya said earlier, and that's sort of the thinking about your readers. It's really important. It's you have to write for someone in specific at some level. And sometimes you write for that person, in my own writing. Sometimes something will happen and I know that there are people who are looking to voice a certain opinion, and I'll try to, as best I can, capture that energy. Sometimes you want to write against that person somehow, right? Or you want to sort of create a little bit of friction or create space for a different kind of opinion. But I think, Batya and I are both committed to ideas and arguments and good writing, like reaching people and landing with people and writing for a specific community. But what your relationship to that community is at any given moment or at any given piece, might shift a little, just like any good relationship, will evolve, and we'll have moments of friction and moments of tension and moments of alignment.
Okay, and I love those answers, and thank you. But let me ask you, sometimes when one of your opinion writers, they present facts and they are stating them as facts, or they appear to be stating them as facts and not as opinion. And is there any basis for fact checking or making sure that what they say, what they state as fact, indeed is the true facts of the matter?
I fact check every single piece twice, and I have an intern who does a third round. So every piece is fact checked. Now, Israel is a complicated subject in which many of the facts are in dispute. If you see something that you think is an outright falsehood, and you click on the link that's supposed to be supporting it, and the link does not prove what it says it should, you should email me immediately. My email is Batya, Batya @forward.com. And that would be a mistake that I would correct. What I think is probably more likely, obviously I make mistakes, but I think what also happens is that in Israel, on the topic of Israel, it is frequently the case that, so with most things, so there's like a fact, which is this is a thing that is true in the world. And then on top of that is like an opinion. This is what you should make of that. This is what I think that means about the world, right? And this is something people can debate, and this is supposed to be something that you can't debate. When it comes to Israel, someone will say an opinion and they'll cite a fact. And if you challenge that fact, you go down to another layer of fact, and you challenge that one and you go down to another. I mean, there's just a sort of endless, and I know this because I have debated people many times on the topic of Israel. So I suspect that a lot of what people consider to be, oh, but this is a falsehood, is actually maybe he is stating his opinion based on something that he considers to be a fact. And if you would go fact check that, you would look at it, and there are people who say it's factual, but there are also people who just, I mean, it's just, Israel's a very difficult topic. But if you see something that you consider to be an error stated as fact, let me know, because that should not be in an op-ed. There are none of the 3 mandates that I laid out. Is there any room for something that is not factually correct being stated as a fact as opposed to as an opinion?
Ari, any
I
thoughts?
also want to just jump in, if I can, very quickly, as sort of an opinion writer. I just reiterate that and to say that in an ideal world, you know, facts and opinions, there's like a, you know, the Berlin Wall in between them. But, you know, an argument itself is a kind of fact in a way, or it's a statement about the world. I don't mean to be too abstract, but I think the way in which an opinion piece mobilizes and uses facts, I can see, I think it's just important as a reader to really be introspective. Am I really objecting to the argument, or am I objecting to the fact? And it's totally fine to object to the argument. And you can object to the argument just as vociferously as anything else. But that line can be a little bit blurry, because what you're seeing in an opinion piece is are facts mobilized towards an argument, right? So you're seeing facts in motion, right? And so maybe there's a little bit of like that kind of kinetic energy that's moving through the piece is you know, you're objecting to where the facts are going rather than the facts in isolation themselves. But it's tricky and it's complicated.
You know, I want to give an example not from Israel that I think might help you guys like think about this the way that I do. I want to give you an example from abortion, which I think is maybe a less contentious topic in Jewish communities, which is so ironic because it's not in American society. But so, you know, we're used to saying like Americans are divided on abortion, right? That's like a truism. And if you look at the facts, the data, right? So that would be an argument. Americans are divided on abortion. That like looks like it's very close, you know, tightly hewing to the facts. 49% of Americans say they're pro-life and 49% of Americans say they're pro-choice. But if you drill down into those numbers, and this is nuts, but 60% of Americans who say they're pro-choice think abortion should only be legal for a first trimester and should be illegal after that, completely. And if you look at the people who say that they're pro-life, 95% of them think there should be exceptions for the mother's health, for deformity of the child, chas v'shalom, for incest and for rape, which means that 80% of Americans agree on abortion on 80% of the cases, okay? So that's not really actually a divided nation. That's quite a unified nation. So is it false to say Americans are divided on abortion? Well, there's data that backs that up. 49% say they're pro-life and 49% say they're pro-choice, right? So it's not wrong to say we're divided on abortion. It's just that if you look one level below that fact to another set of facts, it actually falls apart. And you can say, well, actually, no, we're not divided on abortion almost at all, except on the extremes. Of course, what do the politicians do? The Democrats say, we're going to be the party that supports abortion until the day before the baby is due. And the Republicans say, we're going to be the party that puts you in jail if you accidentally fall down the stairs and your fetus dies after 6 weeks, right? So our politicians, of course, are getting power out of this narrative that we are divided, just like the media does. But so I think that's an example that I use to guide me when thinking about like the level of fact versus the level of argument.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit more about the language with regard to Israel, some of the language that's used and often presented, I think, as fact. And, you know, and the flyer that we sent out in advertising this program, one of the questions on there was, is it possible to report on news about Israel without politically charged language? And some of us, when we see the term occupation, or when we hear the phrase land seized from the Palestinians in the '67 war, we may be a little uncomfortable with that. And I want to know, how do you choose what language is used and when that language is acceptable and when it's not?
Ari, do you want to start?
Ari, do you?
Sure. You know, I think this is, you know, to tie it back to our previous conversation. This is this sort of thing that maybe our readers were feeling, right? Is that language is also a kind of fact, right? And you might see the language used in an op-ed you agree with or disagree with, and a word might jump out at you. And the truth is, word choice can do a lot of work. There's no question. I think that's what's behind that is that feeling of, let's say you use the word occupation, you know, that there's a lot of argument kind of packed, like a little suitcase, like packed into that word. So I'm very sensitive of that. I try to be in my own writing conscious of the words I choose. On the other hand, as a writer, I believe that, you know, words are what we have. And so, you know, I'm going to try to use the phrases and the sort of resonances and pay attention to the words I use as part of an overall whole. You know, I think I worry about our lack as a culture of a shared language to talk about things. On the other hand, I understand that language is a tool through which you see the world, right? And that if it's like a lens on the glasses, if you have a different prescription, you're gonna have a different lens. But you know, that's just in terms of my own writing. I'd be curious though, Batya, as someone who's in an executive position, to decide that how that looks kind of from the top down rather than bottom up.
So I subscribe to what I call a hostage negotiation philosophy about opinion editing. I once read a hostage negotiation manual by the FBI, and I thought, oh my God, this is what we're doing. This is what I'm in the business of, because we're all held hostage by our fears. You know, when a Jewish person opposes the word occupation, it's not because they don't want Palestinians to have civil rights. It's because they're afraid of what that word means to the safety of the Jews in Israel and the safety of the Jews in America. And you can't judge somebody for a feeling that they have that comes from there, I believe. Similarly, when a Palestinian is upset that Jews don't want to use the word occupation, it's because they're afraid of what that means for their future and their children's future. So we're held hostage by our fears. And the op-ed is a hostage negotiation situation where you're trying to release the person from the emotion that has taken them hostage. So what does the FBI recommend we do in a hostage negotiation? Well, there are 7 steps, but only one of them truly matters, and it's the 4th step. So if you do the whole hostage negotiation and you don't do step 4, you probably will fail. But if you do just step 4, you will probably succeed. That's what this manual said. So what was step 4? Well, step 1 is, you know, identification. Hello, I am the pirate. I have your person, right? Step 2 is proof of life. They have to prove that the person is still alive. Step 3, the pirate makes his demand. It's the ask. I want $2 million. What's step 4? You would think step 4 would be the counteroffer. Well, you can have 125,000. That's not step 4. Step 4 is you have to literally repeat back to the pirate. So what I'm hearing is you want $2 million. That's it. That's step 4. That's the most important step. Why is that step so important? It's important because we spend 90% of every conversation feeling like nobody's listening to us, like we're not being heard, like we're not being seen, like we're not being understood, like we're being called racist because we don't want our children to be massacred. You know, that's how we spend 90% of every conversation. And when somebody just looks at us and says, so what I'm hearing is you're afraid, you know, that step lowers our defenses by like 80%. We just become so much more willing to engage. And this is the FBI saying this, it's not me. So what does that look like in an op-ed? How do I do that in an op-ed? I want the reader to feel like I see them. And I want this especially when I'm asking them to do something difficult, like listen to Joel Swanson, which is why Ari is there. Ari is in that debate to make you feel seen and heard. That's me saying to you as an editor, I see you. I see that you're scared. I got you the smartest guy on the planet who agrees with you to represent your point of view so that you can feel a little bit less afraid and angry and aggrieved and ignored. You can feel less ignored when I ask you to read Joel, who you don't agree with. That is my philosophy. I clearly failed in editing that debate that you all read, and I'm sorry for that. But to me, that is the goal. And that is why it's so important to have both sides. I feel like I'm making a contract with my readers, which is if you will do me the honor of reading the smartest person who disagrees with you, I will bring you the smartest person who agrees with you to comfort you, to let you know that I see you and that I don't judge your fears, but I'm in a hostage negotiation with them. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I love that, Batya. I love it. And I would also just say that, words are very important, but they're also kind of just like, they're clothes, in some ways. And I would encourage, readers to sort of push through, to Batya's idea of pushing through fear a little bit, try to understand the overall argument. And perhaps those words were a tell. Perhaps they were a tell of a perspective that you cannot abide or that's difficult or impossible for you. But maybe they weren't. Maybe they were a kind of red herring, or maybe, so I want to encourage attention to language, but I also want to suggest that a little bit downstream, you might still disagree, but the disagreement about a certain vision of Jewish values or Jewish sovereignty or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict going forward is more interesting than if you had just stopped at the word occupation, So it's not just that you disagree, it's how do you disagree and what's the quality of that disagreement. And, what we try to do in those debates is push as far as we can to get to kind of a stratum of disagreement that feels useful, right? That feels useful to help think about the world.
You guys have clearly thought about all of this quite a bit, and I congratulate you on such well thought out and well formed answers, and I appreciate it very much. But we had a lot of questions about news reporting, and I know you guys are on the opinion side, but sometimes these words and this language finds its way into a news story. And so tell me, and if you can, I know you're all very deep in the world of opinion writing, but how about the way news is reported today? And is it possible to report news that's totally free of bias? Can it happen in today's society? You mentioned, Batya, the New York Times as an example of somewhere that it doesn't happen so as often as it should to have news free of bias. What should the ideal news story teach us, and how can a news writer, separate fact from opinion?
I mean, I'm not going to lie, I do prefer reading about Israel in the Wall Street Journal than in the New York Times. I feel so guilty admitting that, but I'm not going to lie to you.
You're not alone.
I have to say, though, to me, a lot of this is really, it's actually more about a bigger class divide in America. Like journalism used to be a kind of blue collar trade where you didn't have to go to school for it. In like 1930, just a third of journalists had ever been to college. And now 92% of journalists have a college degree, and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and NPR, they will only recruit interns from the top 1% of schools. So we're getting this kind of Harvard educated journalistic class, and you're seeing that reflected in the values and in the, they don't really like this kind of, these sort of very lefty elites don't quite, they call hearing from the other side or unbiased reporting, they call it both sidesing. They consider it to be, these, kids coming out of these very elite universities, they consider it to be a crime to hear from people that they disagree with, and there's this whole cancel culture movement to deplatform people they disagree with. And of course, you're seeing that show up in like their need to call President Trump racist in every article, for example, because if they don't, there will be this huge backlash. Oh, you forgot to call him a racist this time, this kind of a thing. So to me, there's definitely a shift in that direction. The media has been totally co-opted by a culture war on sort of identity issues like this, and it's really bleeding out into the news coverage. That's why I think it's definitely possible to still report the news objectively. Whether or not that's where the trend is going, I'm not so sure. And to me, when I think about that, I think about like the late 19th century, which was sort of this golden age of American journalism. The news was not actually much more objective at the time, but it was much more, there were many different parties. So you had like the socialist newspaper, which was the Forward, and then you had the communist newspaper, and then you had the capitalist newspaper, and you had 100 Jewish newspapers. And what was really important to me at that time was that you had a lot of newspapers representing the interests of the working classes. And that's really what's missing today in the elite media. So to me, I'm much more bothered by the fact that it serves the elite and is written by the elite than I am by the fact that it is partisan, because you can have great news that's partisan as long as everybody has their outlet. Whereas today it's really sort of navigated into the two kind of elite centers.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think what we're seeing is, on the one hand, fragmentation, and on the other hand, consolidation, right? And those are happening simultaneously. So you have fragmentation of outlets, of venues, of streaming, basically. And then on the other hand, you have consolidation of perspective, or consolidation of worldview. I think it means that readers have to do more work in two ways. One, they have to read an article and decide what they think. They have to be better readers, and that means maybe being more skeptical, but sometimes reading an article and say, you know what, this appeared in an outlet I don't agree with, but they've made their case to me, right? They've convinced me that they're describing something true and real about the world. And that could be if you're on the right, you read a piece in the Times, and there are amazing pieces in the Times of reportage, and you say, you know what, this added to me, and vice versa as well. It also means that you kind of have to read a lot, and you have to read widely, to Batya's point. I mean, and that's never been easier to do. It's also never been more confusing and more confounding to do. But I think, we see the world, it's almost like there used to be one mirror, and now we have lots of different shards, and you kind of have to look in each one of those pieces. I also think, that, to Batya's point about historical perspective, I mean, there was a period, the famous three networks, Edward R. Murrow, Voice of God, all of that in the middle of the 20th century, perhaps when many people, in our group maybe came of age in a certain way, and certainly people of my parents' and my grandparents' generation did. But it might be true that before that and after that, the reality, in fact, has been much more rambunctious ideologically, right? And that there were sort of, and so somehow if you can kind of like crowdsource truth in a way, or put together a kaleidoscope, you might get insight. But I share Batya's concerns about the sort of hegemony of a certain, or an identification between writer, audience, and newspaper that's totally seamless, right? And doesn't have the friction of of engaging people with a different point of view.
There are 1,000 more questions, and we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask Rabbi Yafi's question that he sent me. And moving forward, we've had this great discussion about facts and opinion and news and what it's supposed to look like and what it does look like. But moving forward, and Rabbi Yafi writes, as informed consumers of today's media, do you have any suggestions or guidance for us to be able to learn the facts about any given topic free of editorial opinions and bias? I mean, you both, from what I think I heard, is that bias is here to stay in news. We will see it, and we just have to know it and identify it and accept it in many ways. What's the best way for us to learn to read a piece? How do you suggest that we read a news piece in the best way, and in the way that we can best learn the facts before and helping us form our own opinions? Ari, do you want to start off on this one?
You know, I think I would read, I would treat the news like you treat people, and that's make a la carte judgments. What I really worry about is these sweeping generalizations of sort of, I don't believe anything I find in this outlet, or I don't believe anything I find there, or I believe everything. And I think we live in a world where we just have to make more decisions about what we trust and what we don't trust. I still think the rigor and fact checking of major publications, despite their flaws and despite their biases, is an imperfect but real bulwark, right? And I think there's a way in which kind of legacy media, again, whether on the right or the left, the Journal or the Times, still is a pretty good guarantee that what you're seeing is more or less true. And of course, we can cite examples and where that might not be the case, but I think that kind of quality still matters. I think to Batya's original point, thinking about the distinction between fact and opinion, and insisting on that in the news you read is really important. I also think that, not to sort of be a skeptic or all of that, but the world is hard, and biases are not just in the articles they read, they're in our hearts and in our minds, and so thinking of that both the news we read, is made flawed, but also that we bring our own kind of bent to things, and just being self-aware readers, self-critical readers. And like I said, seeking out voices different than your own is really important.
Batya?
I would say two things. The first is opinion seeps into news reporting, in fact, when someone stands to benefit from it, when somebody's power is at stake, right? Like when somebody's reporting on, when a journalist is reporting on some local story about whether or not to put out a stop sign at some intersection, there's very little for the reporter at stake to misreport that, right? In local news, for example, in local news, when they're reporting on crime statistics, there's very little incentive to misreport that. The incentive comes in when it comes to big culture war issues, and when somebody stands to gain from misleading you with their opinion. And what I would say the best thing you can do to resist that is to resist the politicization of everything. Like, you're being told that everything today is political. It's not. Very few things are political, and you don't actually have to follow all of that stuff very closely. So that's the first thing. Don't just resist people telling you that everything is political and that you have to choose a side. Anytime an article is telling you, making you feel like you have to choose a side, just walk away. That's not information that you need. You just don't need that information. Someone is trying to get power from you reading that. Just resist that. And the second thing I would say is make friends with people you disagree with and love them. Love those friends. Like, that is the most important thing you can do in our nation, both the Jewish nation and the American nation, is make friends with people you disagree with and love them. Like, that act of granting your love to somebody who you disagree with is going to heal all of the fissures of our nation, and it's going to make news articles that are too opinionated totally moot and unable to harm you.
I love that. There's been a thing going around the internet that says, love your neighbor like yourself, and love your neighbor even if he's not like yourself. And that's exactly what you're saying. And I appreciate that very much. We're just about at the end here. I want to give Janet and Erwin the final question here, because I know that do you have any, Janet and Erwin? Let me see if I can unmute you. And, oh, there we go. Okay. Do you have any additional questions for our panelists?
I do, and I'm going to raise this question to Batya, because I think she may have some control over doing some of this. Knowing that the Forward is an important Jewish publication and should be representing the full breadth of the Jewish community, can and will the Forward become a more balanced Jewish publication, reporting news and not only liberal progressive narratives, and that the opinions that have been based on the repeated distortions and not on facts start becoming more representative.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your wonderful question. I'm not gonna opine on the news side because I would get in trouble. So I'm gonna stick to my side. And I guess what I would say is, I'm sorry that I failed you. I'm sorry that I failed in my hostage negotiation technique to make you feel safe and represented. And I commit to doing a better job, yes.
Okay. All right, Ari, do you want to have something to say about that? We've had many discussions about this.
Sure. Listen, I'm of two minds. I think, just to speak totally honestly, I mean, I think it's sort of, sometimes there's a part of my mind and my effort that believes so deeply in having the biggest tent you can and the biggest camp you can get, and the kind of cacophony of many voices creating a kind of broader harmony and broader orchestra. But on the other hand, I think there are certain projects, there are certain intellectual efforts where, as my mentor Ruth Weiss says, you don't want a group, you want a gang. And I get it that some readers sometimes they want a gang. Like they want people who they totally agree with.
Nothing to do with that.
Go to the wall, go to the front with and fight with, and be in alignment. And I think that's okay. And I think there's a place for both. I think there's a place for there are forums where you want to hear the things you disagree with, and you want to be exposed to that and grow from it. And then there are other times when you sort of want to be among the like-minded, right? And I think we have different parts of ourselves, and I think it's okay to embrace both of those, both of those parts. I mean, I will say, I think Batya has done a fabulous job, and I will say that I was among a group of columnists brought in specifically to sort of like reflect the richness and diversity of the Jewish conversation. And so it's, and I understand why it might feel frustrating to be like, well, you get me, but you also get Joel. But that's kind of the way it works, right? And I just, I found it a wonderful place to work and think. And I know as a writer, the moments of frustration and disagreements pay off, hopefully, by making my voice stronger, right? And my ability to vocalize the ideas and community and causes that I believe in. Hopefully it's made me better at that at the same time, just from the kind of, from the inside baseball perspective.
I said this before, and I'll say it again. I am so impressed with the amount of time and thought that both of you have put into these opinions and helping us understand how you do what you do and why you do what you do and how we should react and respond to what you do. And I thank you both from the bottom of my heart for spending the time to be with us for this hour. I invite everybody.
I just want to thank everybody after you say what you do.
Okay. All right. I invite everybody to continue the conversation. First of all, feel free to join us tomorrow at 12:30 on our Lunch and Learn, which is in our regular synagogue Zoom room. You can contact me in the chat or by email, jshron@comcast.net, JSHRON at comcast.net. If you'd like more information on that, we meet every Monday and Wednesday at 12:30 and have a really wonderful time discussing all things Israel. And I'm sure that our panelists and our guests would love to hear from you as well. Would you like to give your contact information one more time? You're both muted. Oh, Batya, go ahead.
My email is Batya, BATYA, @forward.com. And I would be so happy to hear from you. Seriously, write to me.
And Ari, you're
Hi.
muted. There you go.
Sure, I'm arirhoffman@gmail.com, and I've put it in the chat box. So feel free to copy and paste that into your email address book. But it would be an absolute joy. That's why we do this.
Batya@forward.com and Ari rhoffman@gmail.com. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. And before I turn it over to Janet Irwin, thank you both for a wonderful hour and a wonderful discussion. And to the congregation, I invite you to continue the discussion and hope to hear from you. Janet Irwin?
Okay, I just want to say thank you, Batya, Ari, Rabbi, and Cantor for doing what I would call an excellent program. For our first program, Sisterhood of Men's Club Zoom program, I think you did a great job. And the Cantor forgot to say, our classes are free, and all you can do is learn something and possibly make additional friends. We look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you.
And I'm going to say thank you to Jenna and Irwin and to Cantor Schroen, to our guests this morning, Batya and Ari. I think that one of the greatest things for me is that we have now all the people, I will say that there were 47 boxes on this Zoom today.
49.
49, okay, which means that there are more, I don't know, 50, 60 people here. So for all of us who are here, I think that having a personal connection and an opportunity to share with people who are really in the thick of Jewish journalism today, and I would really encourage people to continue this conversation, because I think we need, as I started the program with, the opportunity to search for truth and understanding and to the give and take. And what a wonderful way to have a Sunday morning. And thank you to everybody who has come and signed in. And we hope that we'll have a few more at the Lunch and Learn on Monday. Have a great day, everybody. And thank you to everybody who participated.